All Cinesamples orchestral libraries are recorded with the players in the exact seating that they would use at a film scoring session. When a CineStrings cello patch is panned to the default center position, you can hear the section playing to the right of center, which is exactly how they sit on the stage. Thus, a full left-to-right stereo image is automatically built into CineStrings. Dennis's full mix setting is mainly comprised of 3 tree mics, with hints of the sectional close mics for detail and the wides for ambience. No compression, equalization, or reverb is embedded into the audio files themselves. For a very large room, the Sony scoring stage has a surprisingly small ring out. About 1 second after a bow is lifted from the string, the room goes silent. Instead, the charm of the stage lies in the unique saturation of sound which occurs the moment a sound source touches and then reflects off the historic floors, walls, and ceilings, a nearly instantaneous effect. Given the appeal and history of this legendary stage, it would be foolish to cover up the most charming aspect of the sound with a convolution reverb. This would be like taking a picture of a picture. The original picture is in much higher quality and fidelity. Inserting a send on the CineStrings bus will ensure that the library maintains 100% of its characteristic early reflections, in addition to the sound of the reverb. A Hall setting with a smooth tail set to around 1.8 seconds is a very common recipe for cinematic orchestral reverb. Let's listen to a small 4-bar example composed using the full mix default setting of CineStrings and no other external processing. Let's route the dry signal to a Bricasti M7 hardware reverb unit for processing using the popular Boston Hall 8 preset, with a tail of 1.8 seconds, and then route the output of the reverb to the stereo bus. You may adjust the return level as needed. A higher return level will yield more reverb. What you just heard was both signals playing simultaneously. The 100% dry signal of the library is still there, but it's being supplemented by the 100% wet process signal of the reverb. The Boston Hall 8 preset is a very safe starting point when dialing in a reverb on the Bricasti. As with all reverbs, each preset in the Bricasti tends to have its own sonic characteristics. Let's listen again using the Clear Hall preset, which has a denser, darker tone. Many classic film scores of the 90s employed little to no equalization until the mastering stage, and then perhaps only a decibel or 2 of boosting or cutting at any time. More recently, scores tend to boost the high-end frequencies of film tracks to give the tone an airy sheen and an artificial sense of fidelity. Typically, this happens somewhere in the 10,000 to 20,000 Hz range. Most vintage equalization units have a 12 kHz setting that was perfect for this type of work, so this frequency is always a wise starting point. Let's listen to the same example, this time routing the output of CineStrings to an A-Design's 2-channel Pultec EQ with a 6 decibel boost at the 12 kHz range. Each equalizer, be it hardware or software, has its own sonic footprint, and often a lower quality EQ will sound forced or pinched when adding or subtracting at different frequencies. Sometimes a narrow cut of the mids will yield the tightly focused rosiny tone that is appropriate for production music. Let's listen to a small 1 decibel cut in this range using FabFilter's wonderful Pro Q2 plugin. Traditionally, the lowest frequencies of the cinematic string section are either left alone or slightly tamed, allowing the low percussion, synths, and brass plenty of headroom to cut through in the mix. Sometimes engaging a subtle low-cut filter gives the strings a cleaner tone and tricks the ear into thinking more highs are present than actually are. In general, track level compression is not typically used for mixing cinematic strings. Generally, fader movements and global balancing are the best tools for dynamically treating the strings. If compression is necessary, it's best to use a very small ratio and to just tickle the gain reduction a little. If the meter on the compressor only moves slightly, that's a healthy sign. Too much movement will result in an undesirable pumping, while not enough movement results in no compression at all. Generally, a small ratio between 1 and 2 to 1 should be enough to tame a wildly dynamic section. To keep the compressor mostly transparent, use a fast attack and a slow release. In general, the tickle method with a small ratio quick attack and slow release will serve you well when using compression even with other instruments in the orchestra. Let's apply some subtle compression to this passage using Wave's renowned Renaissance compressor. Sometimes it's nice to colorize the strings, or even the entire mix, to better serve your picture. Even a hint of something unique blended into your section can distinguish your work from other composers. One of my favorite ways to color a string section is to gently drive the input of a tape machine plugin. The most powerful knob on a tape machine plugin is the input knob, as the tape sound is basically the distortion that happens when the tape machine closes in on its maximum headroom. Let's open up an instance of UAD's fantastic Studer A800 tape emulator. By setting the tape, calibration, and IPS knobs, inches per second, to the left, we access the cleanest signal chain of the plugin, which was very common for soundtrack work. Let's then turn the input knob up to the first marker, which will give us more of a tape effect sound. Now turn the output knob down by 1 marker to compensate for the boost in volume in the strings. The resulting sound is equivalent to 3 decibels of transparent tape processing at equal volume. Tape may be nice for adding some saturation to the tone, but sometimes adding more grit may be desired. Let's open up an instance of the Saturn plugin by FabFilter on the strings bus and insert the basic saturator preset. Let's use the boost subtract method to drive the input by 2 decibels while subtracting 2 from the output. Let's now set the mix knob to 10% wet, adding just the smallest amount of distortion to the mostly clean dry signal. You can color to taste using the mix knob, but 10% seems to be a safe point to begin exploring. Tune in for more tutorials from Cinesamples.